Hey guys, welcome back to the show. I'm Parker Admiral, and this is The Conversation Station. Today I am here with Mr. Aidan Steinbach. Aidan is a brother of mine through a program called Apogee Strong. He is one of the smartest people I know, and overall just a good man. Welcome on, Aidan.
Thank you for having me, Parker. I have to say I'm truly honored to be put in a position where, I don't know, perhaps I can impart some knowledge to your followers who are, more wayward than me, less wayward than me. I have no idea why anyone would even want to listen to me, but we shall see. Hopefully it will be a good conversation, and I really am honored to be here. So it's good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you too. I would say that I could name probably about 20 other brothers who would strongly disagree with the fact that that you don't know who wants to listen to you. I mean, remember everyone was Aidan 2024.
I mean, apart from it being legally infeasible for that to happen, no, I mean, look, in the grand scheme of things, the way that I frame it, right, is that I'm 17 years old, and in the grand scheme of things, I really don't know a whole lot about anything. I think that at certain times I would disagree with myself. However, as I said, there are so many other individuals who appear on podcasts every single day who are more qualified in every way, shape, and form to impart advice, I suppose you could say, and impart knowledge to the individuals who take their valuable time and listen to these podcasts while they're in the gym or while they're on the road or while they're going for a walk or whatever else. So I hope that perhaps some of the knowledge that I share, some of the things that I share, will be able to provide value and will be able to resonate with some people on some level and not just be from, some newfangled 17-year-old that no one wants to listen to. So, I mean, apart from that, I think it'll be good.
Yeah. So I want to start out with your journey to get where you are, because I've known you since I joined the Apogee program, but I want to know what has the journey been that has gotten you to be the great young man you are today?
Well, thank you for asking, first and foremost. And I would say, starting at the beginning, I was born in Pennsylvania, and I didn't really have a great childhood growing up. I never really had a father in the home, and whenever I did, it wasn't really a good situation. We can just kind of chalk it up to that. I lived with my mother and my grandmother for the vast majority of my life, and at the age of probably 11 or 12, I was an extraordinarily wayward young delinquent who was running into some trouble, shall we say, with not only legal institutions, but school administrations and everything else. But the interesting part about this is for the vast majority of my life, I wanted to join the military, and I wanted to join the SEAL teams, and more specifically DevGru or SEAL Team 6. So it was kind of interesting juxtaposing these two positions of, me having at this point not the cleanest of records and wanting to join an institution which required the cleanest of records. So eventually I had more or less a reckoning, a come to Jesus moment, if you will, whenever I was around 14 or so, and I changed my path 180 degrees. It was around this time that the pandemic happened, and I used that intentionally because this virus came from China. It was intentionally released. I don't believe it leaked it obviously leaked out of a lab. It didn't come from a bat.
Leaked
but I believe
out
it was
of a lab.
intentionally. Yeah, I believe it was intentionally released so as to coincide with 2020, the presidential election at the time, which was also stolen. So there you go. I've probably pissed off about 50% of your audience within 4 minutes and 16 seconds of this. So I'm doing my job, but not to get too sidetracked, right? It was at around this time that I did a serious reassessment of my life, what I wanted to do at this point. I started to understand the changing political tides, and I realized that, with the conjunction of the military-industrial complex and everything else, it wouldn't be the wisest of decisions to devote my entire life to write a blank check to a government who would only use me as a pawn in a much larger game of chess. And for probably the span of 2 or 3 years, I wanted to be a neurosurgeon. right? And then as I said, we get to the point whenever the shutdown happened. And during that reassessment period, I had seriously asked myself, well, Aidan, why do you want to be a neurosurgeon, right? I love medicine even till this day. I love anatomy and physiology and psychology and neuroanatomy, right? But I said, why do you really want to be a physician? Why do you really want to be a neurosurgeon? Is it just to help people? And perhaps if I can impart this in a way that sounds the least, how do I say, selfish, right? And everything else to that end, I came to the conclusion I simply wanted to be a neurosurgeon because I Googled highest paying positions in the United States, and neurosurgeon was the first thing that came up. It was around this time that I read The Art of the Deal and Think Like a Billionaire from Donald Trump, and I realized I kind of had a bit of an epiphany moment, as Russell Brunson would describe. And I realized, oh my gosh, there's a second side to this. I don't have to work a 9 to 5 for the rest of my life. There's another path that I could take for my life. And it was around this time that I started my first company, a contracting company by the name of Spectre Contracting, which only lasted for about 6 months. And that's just by nature of the work that I was trying to get from homeowners in conjunction with my being 15 and the legalities that surround that. And also the state of Pennsylvania trying to, we'll say, they wouldn't like me very much because after I passed the threshold of $5,000 gross of that company, I would have to get incorporated as an LLC. That's just how things work in Pennsylvania. And it was kind of a pain. I didn't want to pay taxes and everything else. And this goes along with some other points I have about the government. So we left that. Through a couple of other entrepreneurial endeavors, I've landed here. And now we're looking at, like Donald Trump, moving into the world of real estate development. And later on in my life, starting a holding corporation by the name of Steinbach Enterprises, which I hope to scale to be one of the largest private equity firms in the world.
Awesome. It's really cool. So I know. So you mentioned you had early on issues with schools. So I know that you are currently homeschooled. Was that not always the case?
No, that was not always the case. I actually graduated high school a year early. So at this point in time, I am out of, I suppose you could say, the formal education system. However, to add a bit of a referendum to that point, I guess, I was in the actual traditional formal education system from the age of about 5 years old in kindergarten until the 9th grade. And that was whenever I was around 14, 15, and the pandemic happened. Yes. So I did spend the majority of my academic tenure, you could say, in the public education system.
Yeah, my path has been pretty similar, as I wasn't in a public school for a while. I was in a Waldorf school, and then I moved to a Waldorf charter. And then that year there in 7th grade, everything shut down. And then I ended up moving up the hill to Nevada City from close to Sac. And up here, I joined a terrible charter school. And it was 2 days a week, during when everyone was like, is it real? Or, just being weird. Mm-hmm. And then last year, I did full independent homeschooling. And with tensions growing in the household between my parents, I had zero structure, and my only real structure was through the Apogee program. And then this year I was like, okay, I need more structure. So let's look into charter homeschools. Okay. Join that, do that for about 2 months. And I drop out of that and go back to regular independent homeschool because the fact that I got more workload than regular school and none of the social aspect, and it was just worse work. I wasn't going to do that. And so then I decided to dive back into this podcast, and we've been got on a schedule, and then I applied for a job. And I applied for a job at the local youth center where I got my pair of AirPods stolen. But we don't talk about that. That's not the staff's fault, because I've had a great relationship with that staff and stuff for years now, since I moved up here. And I was and a position came open in digital marketing and just being a marketing assistant, and it was exactly what I was looking for. So I applied for that position, and I believe it was on Tuesday I was there, and I was talking with them. And because the job is grant funded, You must be a minimum age of 16 years old. I am currently 15, turning 16 in March. They told me they wanted to hire me more than anyone else. I was the only application that stood out, and yet they couldn't. I now have something against anyone named Grant. Grant Cardone? No, I don't know. Yeah.
Very good. Very good. So you were talking about a Waldorf, right? Correct me if I'm wrong. A Waldorf charter education system. Is that a particular means of education, or is that a private charter school network? What does that look like?
So Waldorf schools, there are private schools. I was at a private Waldorf school for a good while, and then I went to a public one. Waldorf schools are a very kind of a hippie sort of deal when it comes to education. They're a vast network throughout the United States and throughout the world. They were started by some guy, I think in Germany or something. I'm not 100. I don't remember the exact story because it's been years since I was at one of those schools. But Waldorf schools, definitely, they're very good for young education. And you don't do textbooks. You learn stuff, and it's really about creativity. But when you get to the point where you're a seventh grader and you have to draw stuff every day, it gets, and it's, so I would say Waldorf is one of those things that I like for kids. I don't know. I would say kindergarten through fourth grade. That's where I think it's the most valuable. But then you get to the point where it seems stupid, where you're like, I'm drawing this stuff. Why don't you let me watch a documentary on it and make a video telling you what I learned? So I would say Waldorf is just an alternative form of education that it has a vast network of schools.
Understood. Very cool. Very good.
So we haven't touched on this much yet, but because you didn't even touch on it very much when you were talking about yourself, but the Apogee program is something I really want to dive into, because that's how we know each other, and that is that was probably one of the most monumental and biggest impact things on my life, that program. And I just wanted to ask you a couple questions on it. Like, who's your favorite mentor? I'm curious. Who's your favorite mentor we've had on? Because we have had some really cool mentors. I know your favorite would probably be Jordan Peterson, if he had been able to make it on that one time.
I don't know. Maybe, perhaps not. There's a little bit more to Jordan Peterson than meets the eye, but
there's more to everyone than meets the eye.
Yes. So, I mean, with respect to Apogee, with respect to the myriad mentors that we have had join our calls, I think it would behoove myself and the listeners perhaps to fill time and give context again, so you're not listening to just some nebulous mouth, that the lips are flapping. I was introduced to the Apogee program originally through Mike Glover and a venture that he had funded by the name of American Contingency. American Contingency, very simply, was a decentralized social network across the United States, which simply would serve the same purpose as, say, something like Nextdoor, right? So something like that. It was a localized group of individuals who could network together and set up effectively, as the name would suggest, contingency plans to care for themselves and their communities. Well, later on, this network was actually infiltrated by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, or the Feds, and they had implanted what is effectively you could say they were probing people for domestic terrorism, is what it was, in much the same way that they did to the quote-unquote kidnappers of Governor Whitmer, or the would-be kidnappers of Governor Whitmer, who were actually all just feds, or the same thing they did to the individuals on January 6th, the most tragic day in the history of American democracy, worse than Pearl Harbor and 9/11 combined, even though we won't mention the fact that America is not a democracy, it's a constitutional republic. Nevertheless, though, I was introduced to Apogee via my mother, via American Contingency. We got on a call with Mr. Boudreau, and I believe on January 28th or January 29th of 2021, and it became immediately clear that this would be something that I would be involved with. From that point on, I have missed a total of, I believe, 2 or 3 calls out of the 65 or 70 that I've been involved in this point. I graduated the program with the highest recognition that is offered, along with I'm not my co-host, but my interviewer here on this podcast today in February of 2022. As far as what my favorite mentor would be, it's difficult to say. Much the same way, I suppose, even though I don't have children, picking your favorite child would be difficult. I can tell you there are certain individuals I did not care for in any way, shape, or form. However, if I had to just say one, it would have to be Andy Frisella, or if you want to go one step above that, it would be Matt Boudreau. Matt Boudreau would be my favorite mentor associated with the entire program.
Well, yeah, I mean, Matt is, I'm super excited. I'm having him on relatively soon, and he's one of the best men in the world. He's truly amazing. And Andy Frisella was also a absolutely amazing mentor.
He is.
One thing, what was I going to say something about the program. I was going to talk about, so for me, finding the program, my mom had been involved with Matt for a little bit of time just because he runs Acton schools. For those of you who don't know, he runs Acton schools here in California. I believe he's opening one up in North Carolina. I don't know exactly what that looks like, but Matt, my mom had discovered these schools shortly before we moved up here, which was kind of unfortunate because those schools are rad. And we had gone to multiple of their business fairs in which their students, or I wouldn't call them students, they call them their young heroes, build a business, and then that's what the fair is. It's all of these different businesses. And there's some really cool businesses. But my mom knew who he was. She had listened to his podcast a lot, The Essential 11. And then one day she was like, Parker, there's this program. And she sent me the link. She's like, do you want to join? And me being the idiot I was at the time, I said, sure. I was not sure if I wanted to join. I was like, it's something to fill up my time. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. I read the website. The website, frankly, it's a great website, but it doesn't even begin to get into the 1% of what the program is. And
no, it does not.
And so I was like, sure. And on, I believe, April 28th or 29th, me and my mom hopped on a call with Mr. Boudreau. He did his little screening process. I mean, and then I was in the program, and through that program, I met my best friend, Kaleo Cardoso, who is now my co-host of Battle Squad Calls. And, so it was funny for you. It's like, yes, the intentionality for you seems like it was there. For me, it was, sure, mom, whatever you say, I'll do it. You know, it was the classic teenager move.
Yes. This isn't necessarily to say that I entered the program with such a degree of, to your point, intentionality of I'm going to maximize this to the nth degree. I'm going to squeeze every last drop of juice I can get from this, as much as it was really just blind ignorance, right, of what the program entailed, and saying, okay, well, everything I've done up until this point I can do. I've started a contract company. I'll rip out brick patios, install lighting. I don't see why I can't do this. That thought never crossed my mind, right? So to that end of joining a program and, having to go knock on doors and trade paper clips and everything else, it's just another Tuesday, right? And this is, I think this is a very large concept to impart to people. And whenever you listen to high performance individuals, and, the vast majority of your listeners being the vast majority of just people across the world, have never really met high performance people. I've really never met a high performance person face to face, right? They're extraordinarily rare. They're far less than 1% of the population. We think, the 1% are the executive investment bankers across the country and everything else, and they're multimillionaires, blah, 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 blah. But they're really not. Anyone who makes in excess of $250,000 a year in the United States is technically considered to be the 1%. And I can assure you that there's a good number of those people who are in no way, shape, or form high performance. Having said that, whenever you listen to a number of these people, whether it be in the endeavors of the professional fields like real estate development or private equity, or for that matter, whether it be the entrepreneurship of someone like Joe Rogan, right, starting a podcast while he's describing fights on the UFC. I know nothing really about professional combat sports, though I have been involved in combat sports. The one commonality that you hear, whether they express this or not, is that it never crossed my mind that I couldn't do it. Right. And this is a huge point to consider, right? Because perfection equals paralysis of whenever we start to think, that usually doesn't do you any good. It's the same thing if you look at it from some of the most mathematical endeavors in the world, like trading the markets, right? There's a good majority of the time where you just move, you just act, right? You just close the deal. That's it. You don't need to think. Look at the fundamentals, and if the fundamentals make sense, move, execute, pull the trigger, right? But if you sit around and you analyze every single detail about that deal, by the time you have your quote-unquote analysis done, the deal is gone. And that's assuming you even finish your analysis, because the vast majority of people, they can almost quantify this in their minds of, oh, well, I'm analytical, right? I'm the intelligent individual, so I'm going to sit here and, I'm so smart. And they think this is a positive, to sit around and analyze every detail and make sure things are perfect. And they think that perfectionism is a positive, and they never pull the trigger, and they don't understand that it's, generally speaking, the one thing that holds anyone back from accomplishing anything in their life outside of a quiet life of desperation, of mediocrity, is just pulling the trigger. And they think that listening to a podcast or reading a book or doing anything of that sort is pulling the trigger. It's not. Right. So there's a little side tangent for you. But to your point of like starting this podcast, did it ever cross your mind that you couldn't do it, or did you just do it?
Well, for me, I had come up with the idea because I love talking to people. I'd come up with a name, and I had a microphone, but I hadn't gone after it yet. I had set the idea. I had said the idea on our mentor calls, and it just wasn't happening. And then one day, a man by the name of Mr. Rodney Farrell, who has been a guest mentor on the Apogee calls, and who is a close friend of my parents from when they were in an MLM business. He is, and he went to high school with Matt, and he came up one weekend. I keep in mind, I have shadowed him before, and I had shadowed him before we started this podcast, and I was talking with him when he was up here, and he is like, you know how Matt gets you to do stuff by calling you out?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
He is almost an inverted version of that. He gets you to do stuff by getting you excited about it and making you feel good about it. And he was just like, let's do it. Let's get a date I want to come on your podcast. Let's get a date down. So I got a date down, and I started, and we recorded that episode. And then a couple weeks later, I did another. Then I did a full branding change because it looked like a 12-year-old's gaming video with the colors. And then I had Aditya Kapoor on from our program. But then after that, I had slowly, as episodes went on, there were bigger and bigger gaps between recording. And then I had Sean Briscom on, and then I had a second cousin of mine named Joe Hobbs on to the podcast. And that podcast I recorded in late June, and it didn't come out until a couple weeks ago. And that was because summer hit, and I did what every teenager does in summer and be an idiot and just stop. But then recently, after quitting the terrible school program, I was just like, you know what? I'm just going to do it. So I made some calls, made some messages. I got people scheduled, and I said, I'm putting one out every week. And it was late October. I was like, I'm getting people scheduled. And now my goal is one a week. And yesterday I dove into some Gary V, the Gary V content model. Mm-hmm. So now I'm starting down that rabbit hole of putting out, like he says, 30 pieces of content a day, whatever that is. So it's definitely a rabbit hole that I am beginning to dive down, but it was When I have been doing the podcast, there's no doubt in my mind. It's when I stop that the doubt comes.
Absolutely. You think about, say, pushing a car, right? Have you ever pushed a car?
No, I have not.
Okay. I've pushed my fair share of cars. And I'm sure that someone listening to this podcast has pushed a car. Or you've obviously ridden a bike before, right? What's the most difficult part of riding a bike?
Getting started.
Getting it started. It's the same thing with pushing a car. It's building that momentum, right? And reading through those first two books from Donald Trump that I did, and listening to, I believe, every single formal speech he's ever given, watching every single episode of The Apprentice that has ever been filmed before it was acid washed off the internet, which that should tell you something about the quality of those shows, the fact that they were acid washed off the internet.
Is that the one where he goes, "You're fired"?
Election.
Is it that show?
Yes, sir, it is.
My parents were on that show.
Really?
I believe they were like guest judges. My dad has a photo in the living room. If I wasn't kind of locked away in the studio the way it is, I would go grab it. But I have a photo of my father with Mr. Donald J. Trump.
You will have to send me that photo.
I will
please.
send you that photo.
Ask him
it's
when
on,
it was.
Okay, I will ask him.
And I will, I don't care how long it takes me. I am now going to rake through the internet, the deep, dark interwebs, to find that episode and watch it. And, that's going to be quite the endeavor. But nevertheless, you go through and you listen to much of his speeches and you read much of his writings. And one of the overlying points, the overarching points that he makes is never lose momentum. Right? He says that there was a developer whose name escapes me, but he was one of the largest real estate developers throughout the 1950s. Okay, he basically marketed and really pioneered the idea of subdivisions. Okay, and made a tremendous amount of money by the time he was about 40 or 50 years old. Okay, he was worth at least a few $100 million, and he sold off his company to what would be an investment bank. And he went and he lived on the French Riviera on a yacht for 3 or 4 years. And in fact, some of your viewers might recall, if this sounds vaguely familiar, he gave this speech at the National Jamboree for a bunch of Boy Scouts. I was not there. I was involved in the Boy Scouts at one point, but due to pedophiles and stuff like that, I was removed from the program. So nevertheless, right. And this developer, he lives on his yacht for 2 years. And he starts to get that itch. He starts to say, you know what? I don't like this. I was obviously meant for something more than driving Ferraris, gambling away my money at the Monte Carlo casino in Monaco, and having some very beautiful Ukrainian and Russian women next to me. So he came back to the United States, and his company was in shambles. It had gone from one of the largest real estate development companies in the country to a fledgling enterprise. And he went ahead and he bought this company back from this investment bank for what was effectively pennies on the dollar. And he was never able to rebuild it. And he died a poor and destitute man. And he was at a party. He was at a social gathering in the one of the elite circles in New York City whenever Mr. Donald Trump recognized him and approached the old man, who looked a bit tired, looked a bit worn out, and really just like a hollow vessel of a human being, which is a terribly sad thing to see, knowing the importance of his life and how that impacted the world of real estate. And he went and asked him, what happened? Well, what was the one mistake that you made? And he looked up to him and he said, Donald, I lost my momentum. I lost my momentum. Never lose your momentum. And he said, right, that one fatal blow was living on the French Riviera for 2 years. That should have never happened. So this is, it kind of parlays into my view about retirement, right? Retirement sounds like the worst thing in the world to me, because it's a death sentence to whatever you've accomplished in your life, on top of the fact that, look, even if you're into living on a beach and drinking mimosas and everything else, you do that for 18 months and it gets pretty boring. I wouldn't know a whole lot about living on a beach or drinking mimosas, but I have been told it gets boring, right? You were meant biologically, you were meant physiologically to work, right? In the very same way, I believe there's a statistic that states for every, I think it's actually a disproportionate number, for every hour that you spend sitting in a chair, you shave like a minute or 30 minutes off the span of your life. right? Which sounds astronomical, and I could be getting those figures entirely wrong, but I do guarantee you they are somewhere in that ballpark. The more you sit, the shorter your life becomes. And why is that? That's because physiologically we were not meant to do that. In the very same way, if you read through the Bible, right, you read through the oldest works of literature in the world, and nowhere in there is retirement mentioned. Nowhere is it mentioned that you just stop working, and that, you sit around and your grandkid comes on your knee, and maybe with the vast fortune that you've acquired, your 29 years spent working for your boss, that maybe you get to go home and he gives you a gold watch, and maybe you can buy a BMW, right? Nowhere is that mentioned in the Bible. No. It's you work until you die. That's what it is, because that's the only thing that fulfills a human being. And, this isn't to say before you say, oh, Aidan, well, money doesn't make you happy. Well, clearly you don't have any money, but that's beside the point, right? Is you're to an extent, you're right. No, money doesn't make you happy. The Ferrari won't make you happy. The Gulfstream won't make you happy. Or, perhaps I'm painting myself into a materialistic corner. Whatever that thing is that you desire, whether that be fame or whatever, that's not necessarily going to make you happy. But what will make you happy is the sense of achievement, the sense of accomplishment, the fact that you start from point A, you say that you want to get to point C, and then you take the actions every single day to say, hey, look, I went from point A to point C, and now I have a Gulfstream, right? So no, it's not necessarily the Gulfstream itself that makes you happy if you didn't work for it. If you did work for that and you did accomplish it, then that's the meaning of life right there. That really is.
Yeah. 100%. It's not what you get, it's how you get there.
Absolutely.
So one little comment real quick on Donald Trump. His hair is completely real.
It is.
It is.
It is completely real.
My dad watched someone he knew. Donald Trump actually let someone run their hand through his hair to prove to them it was real, because they didn't believe it. It's
a very rare occurrence.
Yes, and it's also a very Donald Trump thing to do.
It is. It's very Trumpian, yes.
Yes. Now, my question for you, because you are very knowledgeable in all of these things that aren't very talked about by the mainstream in any sense, is what is the biggest problem in our world today that no one talks about?
That's a doozy of a question, Mr. Parker. And to your point, the mainstream propaganda network, or the mainstream ministry of propaganda. Now, of course, you're not going to discuss anything like that. I mean, we could talk about the education system and the fact that was designed to make you into a factory worker, a good little worker bee, and the information that the average blue-collar American consumes is from the mainstream media. So why would they really ever share anything of value with you? They wouldn't. I mean, look who controls them. So what I would say to answer your question in the simplest way, and one that I don't think I've really heard anyone talk about, is the falling away of the faith. Okay, is the falling away from this doctrine, the King James Bible, the real true Bible. And what I mean by that, and Andrew Tate has used this example. I certainly will not take credit for it myself, but I think the analogy stands, is that if you were to put on a t-shirt that said Jesus is gay, right, in London, and you were to walk down the street, you'd make it to the other side of the street just fine. If you were to put on a t-shirt that said Allah is gay or Muhammad is gay, right, you wouldn't make it 3 feet without having your head chopped off. Why is that? That's because, right, true Muslims, true individuals who follow the faith of Islam, they take it seriously, right? That's the reason why you go to Dubai and there's statistically zero crime. Apart from the fact that in Saudi Arabia, they stone people to death and throw people off of buildings. And if you steal, they cut off your arm. Outside of that, they take the faith seriously, right? It means something. It holds value. It holds eternal weight. And that's something that's completely and entirely lacking in westernized culture, right? People are just, I'm just living to go, day to day and just happy to, live my life. And I'm this hippie nudist and, I like to do CBD and right? Without any regard for what life will be like a month, 2 months, or much less 60 years into the future, whenever you're put 6 feet under the ground. What follows after that? People bear no thought to what eternity really is. So what I would say is, if you were to have individuals who truly followed the teachings of this book, and perhaps to touch on the subject of Christianity, I think a lot of people, whenever I say that, they're like, you're some Jesus freak or whatever else, and they immediately tune me out. And I was in the same exact position as you. In fact, for the vast majority of my life, I had a disdain like none other for the Christian faith. I would go to I was dragged to church, kicking and screaming, and I would make a scene of falling asleep in the middle of a sermon to demonstrate my indignation of how much I detested it. And why was that? That's because everyone around me was a lying hypocrite who had accomplished nothing with their life, an abject loser, right? Why would I want to follow the advice of a loser? I mean, you drive like an old beat up Honda minivan. Why would I care, right? So during this period of reassessment in my life, I was like, you know what? Before I throw this thing into the garbage can, which thank God I never did, let me actually read it. And I started to read through this book, and I said, wow, there's some good stuff in here, okay? And I continued to read through it, and I read the book of John, and I started to understand truly what sacrifice means. I started to understand what it meant for the one true God who created the universe and everything in it, and you and I and the birds and the trees and our ability to perceive color and sound and smell, to send his only son on earth to be tortured and crucified so I could be saved, a mere mortal, right? So people who are prostitutes and porn stars and everything else and criminals so they could be saved. I mean, the weight that carries is extraordinary, right? So I started to look at this and I realized, oh, wow, I didn't actually know any real true Christians in my life. Those people were never going to heaven. Those people were going to hell because they did not follow the teachings of this book, right? Which if you truly do follow the teachings of this book, I believe that's the hardest thing any human being can do, right? It requires an extraordinary degree of self-discipline, of self-control, of altruism, right? So outside of just saying the falling away from the faith, I think the overarching point to that is something that Andy Frisella talks about, and that's the complete and utter lack of personal excellence in this country and in the world, right? You think back to the 1920s, the 1930s, the 1940s, the 1950s, people went out and accomplished something with their life, right? It wasn't a day-to-day of playing video games and smoking weed and, how many chicks can you run through and everything else, right? You actually understood that if you did not do something with your life, you were seen as an abject failure, right? And that carried weight because you knew your parents would throw you out and they would disown you, and you would bring great dishonor to your legacy and your bloodline, right? And that meant something. And now that we no longer have that in this country, it's a terribly sad thing. So you juxtapose that with the countries that do have a pursuit of personal excellence, right? To an extent that you see it in more of the capitalist portions of communist China, right? And I know that sounds like a bit of an oxymoron, right? Capitalism in communist China, but why do you think communism has an economy? They understand that the free market works, so they have to implement it to a certain extent, right? And there's a massive pursuit of personal excellence there, right? People are waking up every single day to try and better themselves, even whenever they don't have the freedom to do it. So the fact that we have people in this country who have the autonomy to go out and do anything that they want to do, and that's something that we really take for granted here, is truly extraordinary that individuals do not capitalize upon that. So to answer your question again, I would say it's a two-pronged problem of people not understanding that they're a part of something that's much larger than themselves, and that they have a duty to something larger than the person that's staring themselves in the mirror, right? Which is a duty. You do have a duty to yourself, and you have a duty, obligation, and responsibility, as Grant Cardone would say, to become successful and to serve your family and to fulfill your potential. But you also have a duty to God. You have a duty to something that is much larger than yourself. And if you don't see those two pictures at the same time, if you can't understand the macro and the micro, you're destined to fail in some form or fashion, even if that means you become a multi-billionaire in the process. If you don't understand that you have a duty to society, you have a duty to God, you have a duty to this country, in my eyes, you're a failure.
Absolutely. And, for me personally, I haven't really dove into faith that much, and I haven't read the Bible. But I can totally agree with you with how much I see with a lot of the Christian faith, incredible hypocrisy. Like it's one of those things where it's become such a problem where I don't know if you can second me on this because I'm not too knowledgeable in this, but it feels like you more often find someone who's incredibly hypocritical than you find who's not. And those statistics, it's especially when I would go to church with like my grandparents, right? They'd take me to church on Sundays. I'd go there for the snacks, but, because I was, 9 years old, but I would watch these pastors, these youth pastors telling me this stuff when it's very obvious that they're not applying it to their lives in any regard. And it just felt incredibly hypocritical. And then I'm like, where are the people that aren't hypocritical? Why aren't they here?
Well, you're completely and utterly right. Whenever Jesus talks about true Christians being the salt and the light of this world, much the same way that if you have, some pasta tastes pretty bad, right? Just as pasta itself. But if you get a little fleck of salt on there, you can immediately taste it, right? It's very discernible. And that's the same way whenever you meet a true Christian, right? I genuinely do believe myself to be a true Christian, a born again Christian. I do everything in my power to fulfill the faith and to honor and serve him in everything I do and everything that I say, right? But the analogy that I use with people, why I always compare it to Islam, is because it's not difficult to be able to cite an example of whenever you met a Muslim and you're like, oh yeah, no, that person's a Muslim. They pray 5 times a day. You say anything about Muhammad, they'll like shank you to death, right? Something like that. You can't help but respect that individual. You really can't. Well, it's the same thing with Christianity. The only difference is that Christianity is founded on a fundamentally different premise. It's founded on a premise of brotherly love. It's founded on a premise of sacrifice, and Islam, frankly, is not. But again, I would encourage your viewers, right, if some of what I'm saying about the hypocrisy of the Christian faith resonates with you, please read the Bible, right? Please read the book of John. And that's it. That's all I would ask you to do, is just read the book of John and truly understand what this thing is before you either abandon it or before you openly criticize it and everything else. Because the vast majority of Christians, I'd venture to say, haven't even read the Bible. Okay. So whenever you see someone who's a self-proclaimed Christian, on the news, and then they're in the middle of an affair and, they're caught cussing and blah, 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 they're not truly of the faith. They're not. In the very same way that you have token Republicans and token Democrats, really all it is, just kind of like slipping some money to the mafia so you don't get your business burned down or, your windows smashed in. It's the same thing with people who proclaim to be Christians. It's very easy for, my name to be, let's say, like Taylor Swift or whatever, right? And, my 100 million followers to just say, I'm a Christian, right? And, everybody loves me now and they give me a ton of money and everybody watches my music now because they all resonate with me, right? It's very easy to market yourself that way, and it's a boom, instant hit because everyone can resonate with you. It's an entirely different matter to meet a person who not only talks the talk, but who walks the walk.
Yeah,
right. And that's a very rare thing, very extraordinarily uncommon.
Certainly, I think that's really powerful in the fact that if you're going to criticize something, you might as well learn about it first. Because I think that's one of the biggest problems with our society today is people will completely criticize whatever the other side of politics is, but they have no clue what the hell their point is. They're like, I don't like you because you're this, but they don't know what the hell they said. You look at all these people that absolutely hate Andrew Tate. Because Andrew Tate is the reverse of everything the media, like the left promotes. And I don't necessarily agree with everything he says, but he's certainly right about a lot. And I see these people going up to people in the streets, and I've seen these interviews, and they're hilarious. They go up, they've got their phone as their microphone, and they're like, okay, so what is your opinion on Andrew Tate? And then this feminist lady or whatever is like, I hate him. I think he's terrible. Blah, 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 blah. So what has he said? And it's so funny. And then yesterday I saw a clip of this guy who goes up to a young woman, and she's talking about this. Like, he's like, Andrew Tate has said that women, or he's like, I don't think he even said Andrew Tate said it, but it was obvious that was the vibe. He's like, do women just belong in the kitchen to cook and clean? And this lady goes off on all these reasons why. He goes up to this old, maybe 50-year-old, and he's like, Andrew Tate said that women should just stay in the kitchen and cook and clean and be a housewife. And she's like, well, I'd rather be in the kitchen cooking right now. It was this old, like, Southern black lady. And she's just like, well, that's where I'd rather be. And it's interesting to see, because a lot of people hate Andrew Tate. I don't necessarily agree with him on a lot of things, but I think he's right about a lot.
He completely and utterly is, right? And in the same way, if we were to talk about someone like Alex Jones, right? Alex Jones was right and is right about infinitely more than he is wrong. I'd venture to say, if I were to give you a split on that, he's probably right about 98 or 99% of the things that he says. But the reason why people refuse to listen to him is because he says the true thing in the most offensive, derogatory, turn-offish way you could possibly articulate what that is, right? By saying, and even though he was right about the frogs being gay and
What
everything
the
else,
hell's
the
going
way
on?
he
Sorry.
words and phrases all of that, right? People are like, it's this crazy guy over here, and they won't listen to him. Well, it's the exact same thing with Andrew Tate, right? Andrew Tate intentionally, because he's a showman, right? Because he's an excellent marketer, says things in a way that is so extraordinarily inflammatory to people, right? That it's its own marketing. It's the same thing
Yeah.
with Grant Cardone to a much lesser extent, right? I want haters because all haters do is they just flap their lips about me. It's free marketing. Yeah, go talk about me, right? And I've seen that exact interview that you're talking about, or at least I believe one of them, who was a girlfriend of Andrew Tate, and she's walking through the streets of London with a Louis Vuitton scarf using her phone as a microphone, right? But again, we come back to the mainstream ministry of propaganda, right? That these people, they don't actually think for themselves, right? They are fed their thoughts. They are fed their opinions. They're not from themselves. They simply parrot what they are told, like a parakeet. That's it. They do not have the cognitive capacity to formulate their own original thoughts. So whenever they are asked, what is your opinion on Andrew Tate? Their brain is like a computer, and it's like, Andrew Tate is bad. If you say anything apart from this, you are a bigot and you deserve to be stoned to death. Andrew Tate is bad. And then that's the response. And they're like, okay, well, can you elaborate? 9, right? And it's exactly like you think about a little wind-up doll, right? You pull the string on the wind-up doll, and it has like 5 programmed responses, and you're just going to get the same thing over and over and over again, and it turns into a circular argument, right? So to your point, this is one of the overlying issues that we have in this country and in this world, is that people simply do not have the cognitive capacity to have a civil discourse because they can't have a discourse to begin with,
Yeah.
right? They genuinely do not have enough knowledge to articulate a sentence, because they don't read. The only content they consume is trying to look at Kim Kardashian's butthole, and that's it, right? And whenever you start to look at things through this lens, whenever you look at the fact that the pornography sites across the world receive billions of hits every single day, right? Whenever I was going through a ton of stuff with organic social media marketing and everything else, there's a website, you probably know it, where you can type in whatever the website is, and you can see the amount of traffic that they get every single day. The name escapes me. It'll give you about 2 or 3 searches a day, and it's like, nope, and then it like hits you off, right? And then you got to come back 24 hours later. But if you don't even search these things up, okay, you just go top 10. They're in the top 10. These big websites, which they corrupt the mind. And you think about it like that. You think about the only content these people consume is sports. Yeah, it's no wonder they can't have a conversation with you. And that's intentionally so. I believe that, again, I harp on pornography over and over and over again because it's something that I've struggled with for a long time. I believe that it was intentionally created by the powers to be to sedate the public. In the same way that there's a DEA agent who wrote a book, whose name also escapes me, which effectively espouses, I had told you one time, right, that the CIA had invented crack cocaine, right? Cocaine in and of itself, the pharmacologic profile of it is not a narcotic. Pure cocaine is not. However, cocaine, in the same way that marijuana and many of these other drugs now, you would never take them because they're laced with fentanyl and many other drugs, which will kill you like that, right? So you start to look at things through a deeper lens of, okay, perhaps it's not just left versus right. Perhaps it's not just blue versus red. Maybe there's something deeper here. Maybe you're looking at controlled opposition on both sides, right? All of these fights, everything is orchestrated to accomplish a greater goal, right? And if you think about it through that, well, you can't have the public paying attention to any of this because eventually somebody's bound to catch up to it. Eventually somebody's bound to pay attention. Well, if you can keep everyone sedated by the means of alcohol and drugs and pornography and sports, and, hey, bud, can you bring me another beer so I can watch the football? And, this is nothing against other people. It's just a stereotype, but whatever else. My mentor, he calls these people HFRs, right? High functioning retards. These individuals run society at the end of the day, but they're nothing more than retards. They don't have the cognitive capacity to process anything. Right. So it's worth bearing in mind whenever you interact with someone at the gym or on the street that they really are just an empty vessel. That's it. And that's a very powerful thing. If someone is an empty vessel, because that denotes you can pour knowledge into their brain and they will take it as truth, really, without having a whole lot of filters for that knowledge to go through. And that is where the real power comes in. Right. That is the real thing that you take away from all this, is that people, as Dan Kennedy says, right, are just walking out with their umbilical cords, trying to attach it to someone. They're all silently begging to be led. So if you can be the person who will step up and lead, you really don't have to do a whole lot of convincing. So long as what you say even remotely makes sense and it's genuine and it provides value to people, boom, 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 boom. It's not like what it was in the 1930s where you had 50 other people you had to compete with. You had to knock out and everything else to get that market. The market comes to you. Right? Or at least to a much larger extent than it used to.
Absolutely. And it's interesting to see the people like Andrew Tate come out here, and in 2 weeks, he was the biggest man. He was the most famous person in the world. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because he's like exposing the Matrix, but then he talks about how he's just one of the, he says he will say that he's still in the Matrix because there are 100% ghost figures that no one here knows the name of these ghost figures that truly control the world. And I'm realizing, and after watching Gary Vee's content stuff, I realized Andrew Tate's supersized. He took what Gary Vee talks about, putting out all this content. Then he created Hustlers University, where he teaches stuff, but the number one way to make money is to get more people to join. And the number one way to get people to join is to put up clips of Tate. And so instantly, overnight, he snowballed into the most famous person in the world. You can't scroll for 5 minutes on any platform until he got banned off of everything. You couldn't scroll for 5 minutes without seeing 5 clips of Andrew Tate. You couldn't. He was able to take he was literally able to take to quote you, the high functioning retards, and he overloaded all of them with all of this content that's him and all of these people that have been trained this way. It was like he truly showed me and showed the world how to take advantage of our current landscape of humans.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. He's a master of organic marketing.
Yeah. He hasn't put any money into anything. Really. He's gone on all these podcasts. Controversy is the best marketing. Truly.
Yep.
Truly.
Yep. There's a story that comes from the 1930s. There was a comedian and an actor by the name of Fatty Arbuckle. Okay. And Fatty Arbuckle, as the name would suggest, was very fat. Okay, he was also very funny, in the same way that, I'm not sure what the demographic of your podcast would be, but perhaps some of the viewers and some of the listeners would remember the fat gentleman in Plane, Trains, and Automobiles. Okay, he was basically the original version of this in the 1920s. Well, there was a huge, massive, media. How do I say? Media tycoon, right? We'll just throw out catch-all media tycoon, and he owns really what is a castle in California, and I can't recall the name off the top of my head. Just the same, I can't recall his name off the top of my head. Otherwise, I would. In fact, you can actually look up on your computer right now, Fatty Arbuckle, spelled exactly how it sounds, scandal, right? And you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. But we go through the Great Depression, right? People no longer have discretionary income, and they're really no longer buying newspapers, right? In the same way, they're not buying, we'll say like the Daily Mail, right? A lot of these paparazzi, right? These paparazzi magazines, and that's effectively what this guy ran. The same way, Ghislaine Maxwell. You guys are familiar with Ghislaine Maxwell. Her father, he actually owned the Daily Mail for a little over 2 decades and was a media genius. But that's beside the point. Well, Fatty Arbuckle had this girlfriend, okay? And this girlfriend, she was an extraordinarily beautiful young woman, an up and coming actress, and she died during childbirth, okay? And it was said that, Fatty Arbuckle was the father of this child to be born. And basically, what this media tycoon did is he published his story where he said that this man's basically, would-be mother of his child died and was crushed by Fatty Arbuckle while they were having intercourse. Okay. And they blasted this thing out across the entire world, and it destroyed Fatty Arbuckle. It destroyed his career, took everything from him, right? It completely ruined him in the span of 2 weeks. Because at the time you didn't have a social media, you didn't have an Instaho, right? You didn't have a Facebook that you could respond to. If you didn't own the newspaper, if you didn't own the radio station, there was nothing that you could say. So Fatty Arbuckle reaches out to this gentleman at his castle, and he's like, "Why did you publish this story? You knew it wasn't true. You destroyed me." And he says, "The only news that sells is bad news, right? It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter." So the only thing that people are interested in, to your point about Andrew Tate, is sensationalistic bad news. That's it. And if you can figure out how to craft a story, to craft a message, to take advantage of that, it doesn't even really have to be a very good story. Again, so long as it's sensationalistic, so long as it's bad news, people will consume it day and night unless they intentionally avoid it.
Yeah. And that's where media has gone. You can't watch the news without getting some sort of fear mongering. During the pandemic, we were watching more news than we had watched during any period of my life as a family. And just hearing, no matter what station you're watching, it could be Fox, it could be CNN, it could be Bob's News, for crying out loud, just some random guy talking. The only news that gets the headlines is the bad news. And the only other news that gets the headlines is the sports news. So it's either sports or the fact that someone died, or that there's some secret takeover going on that isn't even happening, but they're going to talk about it to scare you. And the left might talk about the Republicans taking over, and the Republicans might talk about the left taking over. It's just a game of scaring the public.
Sure, to an extent. To an extent, I agree with you, and to an extent, I disagree with you, in the sense that yes, there is a larger takeover that is currently going on, which is being perpetuated by individuals like Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum and the globalists at large. And you have to understand,
there's absolutely something going on. I was just using it as an example.
Yes, right. You have to understand that you must pull your head out of this idea of the right versus the left. And my party is going to beat your party, dadgummit, and we're going to take back the country. You must understand that the individuals who control this world, the same individuals who've controlled the world since the 17 and 1800s and have started every single war in the history of the world over currency, which, by the way, every single war in the history of the world was fought in some way, shape, or form over currency, including the American Revolution, including World War II, including World War I, including the Civil War. All of it was fought over currency, right? These individuals own the right. They own the left. Let's use an example like George Soros, okay? And, I'm going to get sued by the ADL, the little arm of the World Economic Forum, who's going to fine me $500,000 like they did to Kyrie Irving, because you're not allowed to talk about George Soros. But I will nevertheless, I don't care. In the same way that they want to fine Alex Jones $2.7 trillion. It's like, it's just monopoly money. It's all fake. It's just numbers on a screen. Fine me $1 billion. I don't care. Fine me $2 billion. It doesn't matter. But nevertheless, right? You think about someone like George Soros and how he has made his money. He's made his money through equity markets. And whenever you have someone, we'll juxtapose two things, okay? You have someone like Donald Trump, right, who's indisputably a multi-billionaire. You must understand that his money is tied up into illiquid assets, right, into multifamily real estate, into the hospitality industry, not necessarily in single-family homes, right, but diversified through a number of different funds, which cannot easily be liquidated. Compare that to, say, someone like George Soros, who makes his money from trading the markets in, say, 5-minute increments of, selling pounds sterlings to US dollars and making $750,000 in 30 seconds. Well, he makes his money from having his money liquid, right? So if you see someone who on paper has a lower net worth than someone like that person who has technically a lower net worth probably has more money in the bank
and more power that they can exert because it's all liquid and they don't have to deal with the government over it because the government knows the way they make the money is having the cash liquid. And if you give a politician, say, $500,000, that's like campaign changing money for the politician, right? That effectively buys them for life, $500,000. By comparison, $500,000 to George Soros is literally a penny in the bucket. It doesn't matter. And you just bought that person for life, right? So you must understand that these individuals control the right and the left. They manufacture, right, these disagreements and everything else because that's how the media make the money. They make the money through monetizing attention. The longer they can get you to stay glued in the seat and watch the screen, the more advertisements you consume, the more advertisements you watch, the more money they get, right? So the game is, are we still?
Yes, we are.
It's like my screen is frozen. Okay, I apologize, right? But the more money they make, right, is defined by the period of time that they can keep you glued in the seat and watching the screen. And that can only be done through bad news. So if you're sitting around watching Fox News or MSNBC, or God, you're not watching MSNBC. If you're that, you're not just a high-functioning retard. You're actually a retard. Or you're watching CNN or whatever else, right? None of this is real. All of this is manufactured. Unless you're going to independent media to see what's really happening, really, frank, no point in consuming media. Because if you understand why it was created in the first place, it was created to keep you from taking action. It was created to keep you glued in one spot and watching the screen. So you must keep that in mind.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's interesting to think about how much is going on behind the scenes. And then it's also interesting to think about, well, here's the thing. If you get too caught up in what's going on behind the scenes, which even this media, even just diving into something like this where you're like, oh my gosh, there's all these people controlling everything. Even when these people that are controlling everything, people start trying to figure out how they're controlling everything. But in doing that, you are literally perpetuating what they want to happen because you spend all this time for 7 hours scrolling through the internet, learning everything you can on person X to figure out how they're affecting person Y. That's a large amount of time that you could have been taking action, recording a podcast, going out and making money. It's interesting to watch where the conspiracy side of things still helps perpetuate what they're trying to go against.
Again, to an extent, right? In the words of Steve Bannon, there are no conspiracies, but there are no coincidences. Okay, so if you spend 7 hours researching, let's say, Klaus Schwab and how he has a family tree which goes back to the Rothschilds, that's not necessarily a bad thing because knowledge is power, right? The only reason I can sit here and talk to you is because I spend hours and hours and hours and hours reading about this people, right? I far less to the extent that someone like Alex Jones has, who's dedicated his entire life to researching this, and you can see that by tearing a man's tongue out, you don't prove, right, that this man is an idiot and what he's saying is wrong. All you prove is that you're afraid of what he would say. I mean, look at the people who've been attacked the most. Look at the people who are affecting the most change. Andrew Tate wiped off the internet, right? Donald Trump, his entire TV show, which was making CNBC and NBC, right, literally millions of dollars, even after the fact that the show was canceled, right? Acid washed off the internet. You look at Alex Jones, wiped off of every single platform, payment process denied, fined over $1 billion, right? Everything else. Why is that? Because the man is dangerous. Because he has too much information. Look at all the people who've been clicked. So yeah, no, there certainly is value in information. You just have to understand that if I'm not being paid, right, to learn about this stuff, then it has to be tempered. So maybe instead of watching Kim Kardashian's butt, right, in your free time, research this stuff and still devote the vast majority of your time to working, producing, providing value, and serving other individuals. Right? So again, it's a dichotomy, it's a balance of all things in life, but it must be weighed accordingly.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's really, one thing I do think that is fun though is coming up with stupid theories, right? And just like when you're like sometimes when I'm hanging out with my sister, we'll just be like, yeah, so that creepy house 2 doors down, there's aliens there, and we will go into all the reasons why there's aliens there when we know for a fact there's nothing going on there. And so I think that it's interesting to see how conspiracy and I don't know, conspiracy is kind of a word that's kind of stupid because I don't know.
By the CIA. The term conspiracy theorist was created by the CIA individuals who were propagating in what would be the truth and what is a very easy way to slap a rubber label on something and immediately have an
Okay, well, now I have a question for you. What wasn't created by the CIA?
That I couldn't tell you. I'm the Bible.
Yeah, well,
Created by the CIA. I don't believe that Steve Wozniak was controlled by the CIA when he created the modern computer and the modern software upon which effectively all technology operates. Steve Wozniak is one of the most brilliant individuals who's ever walked the earth. So again, I'm not saying that they control everything, but in the same vein, they do control everything. You think about it like this, and say, okay, well, they do this. You're not capable of understanding what an evil person is in the same way that these people are not capable of understanding what a truly good person is. The vast majority of you, if you look at the things that they do, and you're like, I would never think that a Christian would, that you're a good person. These people are pure evil, okay? So whenever you turn 17 years old, right, like me, I just turned 17, and you inherit the entire Johnson & Johnson fortune, and you're worth over $1 billion, and you buy your first Ferrari, right, and you have a Gulf Stream. Well, what else is there to do in life? Seriously, you have all the money, you have all the network, you have all the material possessions, you have any woman you could possibly want, you literally have everything, right? Well, the one thing these people want, and the one thing they don't have, is they don't have respect, and they don't have power, and that's what they get off of, right? So you start to look at it through that lens, and I say, look at it over and over and over again, because that's extremely important. You look at someone who seems off color. Well, perhaps the reason they look off color is because you're looking at things through the wrong lens. You don't have the correct context. You can't frame things in its entirety. And if you do, well, that thing that looks off color starts to look a little bit more in color, right? You start to see the full shade of the rainbow. Point is, right, is that if you already have there's really not a whole lot besides caution, right? Well, like that. It's the same thing why teenagers forget trouble. If they don't have it.
Yeah, sorry, you lagged a bit there, so I didn't fully hear what you said, but,
No problem. My screen's frozen 57 minutes and 2 seconds, and I've been looking at the same picture of you for about 5 minutes, so I mean, hopefully.
Oh, yeah, I can still see you, and, nice thing about this thing is, even if you completely lag out, it records your video on your computer, and then it uploads it to their server when we're done recording.
Very good.
So, I guess we should, I don't know, let's move on from the, that rabbit hole. I don't know. This question could kind of play into this, but if you could spend 1 hour with any person alive or dead, who would it be?
That's an excellent question. And that would be very difficult for me to give you one answer. Very, very difficult. I would have to say, if I could give you a top, right, the first one would no doubt be King Solomon, right? The wisest man who's ever lived, a trillionaire accounted for inflation, one of the wealthiest individuals who's ever lived. Then you live it. We say that he was the or if you're wrong, he was not the wealthiest man on earth. A guy named Mansa Musa, who lived in Africa and actually controlled the entire slave trade across the entirety of the globe. He was also a black man, but those evil Europeans who came and perpetrated the slave trade. Nevertheless, inflation accounted, he had a net worth around, if I recall, $13 trillion, but that's literally another conversation for another day. I would have to say it would be King Solomon to begin with. It would be Winston Spencer Churchill would be the second. He's a huge virtual mentor of mine. I've been reading his works, his literary works, for over a year at this point. And the third is my second largest virtual mentor, and probably one of the men that I look up to more than anyone in the entire world, and that would be John David Rockefeller.
Yeah. I'm curious. So what's the why look for? Why? Like, what's the why on some of those people? I know you gave some general ideas, but I'm curious on what is the core, the deeper reasons behind these, because there's plenty of, well, there's not plenty of, but there's lots of very wildly successful people from throughout history. So why these three?
Sure. Great question. Right. So if I had to give you perhaps the character traits that I would want to glean from these individuals, right, the knowledge that I would want to be able to extract from them as much as humanly possible, though I have a mind that pales in comparison, more likely than to all three of these people, I would have to say that, I think in the words of Andrew Carnegie, right, the worst thing an industrialist can do is learn about the humanities. But if I were to learn about the humanities from anyone, if I were to learn about philosophy from anyone, the practical application of wisdom, it would be from King Solomon, like the wisest man who ever lived. And that's the reason why I say that, is, wisdom is more likely than not the most valuable thing in the world, apart from action. Action and wisdom, in my eyes, are the most valuable things in the world. Moving on to Winston Churchill. What you must understand about Winston Churchill, the reason why I say him, is this man had a degree of perseverance, which is really second to none. He was attacked, berated, cajoled, harassed, bludgeoned verbally for literally about a decade, okay? From the very early 1930s, when he first started bringing the alarm as to the rising threat in Germany and Adolf Hitler. He was ostracized from the government. He was banned from writing. He was destroyed in every way humanly possible. He was painted as a buffoon, a clown, and an alcoholic, and an imbecile for year after year after year. But yet he continued to wake up and put one foot in front of the other. He continued to put in the mouthpiece and get knocked back down by life until eventually he was made prime minister in 1940, whenever Britain went to war with Germany in 1939, and Chamberlain, who was at the time the Prime Minister of England, had to step down because he was a complete and utter imbecile and a spineless coward. But as I've said a couple of times, that is a conversation for today. And as far as John David Rockefeller is concerned, John David Rockefeller is obviously entrepreneurship. In my eyes, he was the best entrepreneur who's ever walked the face of the planet, outside of maybe Andrew Carnegie. And more to the reason why I relate to John David Rockefeller than I do Andrew Carnegie, is the fact that it's very difficult from my perspective, coming from a single mother in a very poor household. I really have not lived a very extravagant life. I haven't lived a very easy life. It's very difficult for me to find examples in the history of entrepreneurship of individuals who came from the same background as me, who have made it to the heights of where I want to go and have become captains in private industry. And John David Rockefeller was, I would venture to say, the epitome of these individuals. He grew up the vast majority of his life with that father. In fact, his father had the nickname Devil Bill. He impregnated women all across the country. He was just a horrible human being, took people for everything they were worth. And then one day he was accused of rape in the town where John lived, and he left his family. And his mother had nothing. She was a devout Baptist, and John had to drop out of school and start working. Right? The only real formal education that he had was a 10-week course in accounting. Right? A 10-week course in accounting, which basically just explained what a financial statement was and how to add a couple of numbers together. Right? That's really all that is. And frankly, had no education. Did not go to the Wharton School of Finance. Did go to the Harvard Business School, and yet would beat the pants off of most of these Harvard MBAs. Right? So if I had to give you a truncated response to why I would pick those three individuals, that would be the truncated response. As I do believe that these three individuals are some of the finest people who have ever walked the face of the planet. And I'm leaving out myriad mentors that I look up to, virtual mentors, most of them dead, deceased. But I would have to say those would be my top three.
Absolutely. What do we want to touch on before we wrap up? Because, I mean, I could talk to you for 7 hours straight with how the conversation flows. So, I don't know what has been going on in your life recently. What's the thing that Aidan Steinbach has been diving into as of late?
Well, I'm happy you asked. Thank you for asking. And the vast majority of my time these days is allocated in a couple of different directions. One of which is writing a book. And that was for a period, actually, how I came to know Parker is whenever I started my second company, a Redline Train and online coaching consulting company, which fizzled out whenever I realized that I hated social media and I'd rather jump out of a 20-story building than continue to do that. I had him as my very lackluster editor at the time, not to shame you, but your editing skills were not up to enough. Okay. They were very poor. So that's how I came to know Parker. And I was never really able to finalize that together. I still have a great deal of knowledge about physiology, about exercise science, and everything else for quite a long time. I'm sure that the record is now broken, but in 2021, I took the state record in Pennsylvania for the bench press, and I hold the state record for the total in my weight class of 75 kilos, which is approximately 155 pounds, right? So I have a decent amount of experience in the physical fitness realm. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to be able to make just a short little book, maybe 50 or 60 pages, almost a little booklet that you can just hand out and give to people. That's just enough to get your wheels turning, get you in a good, solid program that will take you in the right direction. Not necessarily enough that you're going to know everything about exercise. Really, frankly, you don't need to. That's one direction that things are pulling me. And the other is just extending the practical, vocational education that I'm receiving is how I would explain it in big words that really are not necessary. But all that means is, outside of reading Shakespeare, whenever I was wrapping up my homeschool education, it's just shifting over that Shakespeare to investment banking, real estate development, and what have you. And from there, moving into networking with various developers and private equity holders, we get my foot in the door, rise up from there, and at the end of the day, follow the same path that Andrew Carnegie followed whenever he was taken under the wing of a gentleman by the name of Tim Scott, who was the CEO of the Pennsylvania Railroad and one of the most powerful men in the country, who mentored Carnegie into what he became. So that's the 60,000 foot condor view of everything that I'm doing.
That's rad, man. So the book, so how's that coming along? Is that what stage in that process are you at?
Right now, things are just being drafted in a Google Doc. That's effectively what it is. It is by no means professional. I do not have an exact timeline of when that book will be finished. I don't even really intend upon charging anything for it because I don't want to be known as a fitness person, right? I want to be known as a businessman. I do not want to be associated really with that industry. And nothing to say it's haram, forbidden, anything like that, as much as it is just to say that some of the individuals that I aspire to become like, Carl Icahn and so on and so forth, you don't see that part of the past, right? Where they're associated with an entirely different industry. And it's a very rare occurrence to see someone who kind of paves the way in one thing and when they completely shift gears and make it in another thing. Generally, the way it happens is you start in one industry, you stay in that industry, and then eventually you rise to the top of it, right? So I don't intend upon charging anything for this book, and I hope to have it finished, barring extenuating circumstances, prior to February 1st of 2023.
Nice, yeah. That's great. Whenever you get that out, I want to get a copy of this because I've just started like really consistently going to a gym with my mom, and we do this circuit training deal. It's good enough right now because I'm still brutally sore after it. Especially because I have terrible form. I've never really consistently worked out, but it's this gym that's also a yoga studio. So 90% of the crowd is women. So it's funny to just be working out next to these 40-year-olds. But yeah, what was I going to say? Yeah. So, for the viewers, I know you despise social media and you're not really on anything, but, where can they find information about you? Where can they learn about what's going on with Aidan?
Sure, absolutely. I have a website that's aidanbolin.net. .net and a little fact. If you look, it says .net.com. Well, it's like fishing dot. Funny. That because Bolin.net. You can contact me via the website. You can contact me via email, which is abolin_1 at protonmail.com. Like Parker said, I'm not associated with any social medias. You can probably find some old profile on Facebook, which I just refuse to delete. But I don't think you will, outside of maybe your LinkedIn, ever see any Aidan Steinbach presence on social media.
Yeah, absolutely. I will get your, I will have your website linked down below. And I just want to thank you for coming onto the show. This has been awesome.
Well, thank you for having me, Parker. Thank you for putting up with my rants. And I know I lost like 99% of the audience 15 minutes in. They're like, I don't listen to this guy. I know that. Perhaps not. But again, thank you for having me on. It's a great honor. And anything that you need from me moving forward, please let me know. I think it's a wonderful thing that you're doing. I think that more individuals our age need to be doing something. If it's not starting a podcast, if it's not scaling a company, just need to be doing something, anything. Getting out and going to the gym is something, right? So the fact that you're doing this is wonderful and excellent. And anything that I can do to support and promote this, please let me know.
Thank you. Thank you guys at home for watching. I'm Parker Emerald, talking to Aidan Steinbach, and this has been The Conversation Station.